Last week, Vice President Joe Biden accused Pete Buttigieg of stealing his health care plan. He made those statements on his No Malarkey bus tour, reportedly telling journalists they would eat him alive had he stolen someone else's plan.
Buttigieg, of course, he's clapping back, saying he'd been a proponent of Medicare for all who want it long before the vice president entered the race. Joining us via Skype to weigh in on this back and forth is Emma Vigeland. She's correspondent for the Young Turks. Welcome back to the show, Emma. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Emma, who's right? Who stole each other's plan? What?
Who wants my trash?
Yeah.
Like, that's me. But Biden's accusation, I mean, don't make me defend Buttigieg, but it's ridiculous. I mean, they both are basically advocating for a public option, which is not Medicare for all. I mean, to go after Buttigieg, he wants to use the Medicare for all framing and the fact that that proposal is popular and has become the standard for healthcare in this country and the debate that's surrounding it on the Democratic side, because purely of the Herculean effort of Bernie Sanders in making that the national discourse. He did write the damn bill. So what Buttigieg is advocating for is very close to what Biden is advocating for, and that is it's basically a public option, and Biden is expanding the Affordable Care Act as well, which is, it's disingenuous talking points from centrist or corporate media to say that Bernie Sanders or anyone advocating for Medicare for all would be scrapping the Affordable Care Act. Biden just wants to marginally increase it and then eventually introduce a public option, and that's pretty much what Buttigieg is advocating for as well. So not every candidate has to have their own distinct, fun healthcare plan. I mean, Elizabeth Warren got into trouble because she decided to kind of make Medicare for all her own and tried to make everyone happy as well, which in the end made no one happy, and now her poll numbers are slipping. So you can sign on to Medicare for all or you don't have to. And Biden and Buttigieg are close on the issue, with Buttigieg attempting to be more politically savvy and slimy about it, frankly, by calling it Medicare for all who want it, which means no.
And how does the Pete plan compare to the first step of the Elizabeth Warren transition plan?
So what Pete is basically advocating for is a public option altogether. So there's no real plan to transition to eliminating private insurance in the way that Elizabeth Warren's does. So Elizabeth Warren's is basically a two-step, which has caused some on the left to be like, wait a second, why not just include it in the same bill? Hers would basically, for the first 18 months or the first 3 years around that, have a public option to transition towards a next bill, which would be Medicare for all. Now, in theory, I don't think that's a bad idea, but I find the fact that it would be two separate bills a little concerning, because in the end, Congress could revolt. The Senate could just say, we're not going to pass this Medicare for all legislation, whatever, and try to stick with the public option, which would be disastrous. We need to move towards a Medicare for all system, because if there is private insurance around and you're kind of playing that middle ground game, they can gobble up all of the healthy people, and all the sicker people will fall back on the public system, which undercuts it, makes it more expensive, bloats it, and would ruin it. So you have to go all or nothing on this. I think Warren's plan, in theory, would be fine, but I have my doubts about whether it could be executed properly, and then the whole thing could fall apart like a house of cards.
The interesting thing here is I almost respect Biden's willingness to he hasn't adopted that framework, right? So he has just decided, he's like, yeah, I'm going to expand Obamacare, and eventually we'll get to this public option. That's as far as I'm willing to go. And I think that that's my theory of the case. Whereas it seems like every other Democratic candidate is trying to put a spin on the electoral benefit of the Sanders Medicare for all proposal, and then just basically masking what Biden or others would want to do. So isn't it better to just outright come and say it like Biden and just be like, no, I don't believe in this, and this is my proposal? Whereas Buttigieg is really trying to split the difference.
Totally. I totally agree with you. Biden has been fairly honest throughout this process in some ways. And ironically, he's lied a lot. Like when he tried to take credit for whipping votes for the CFPB for Elizabeth Warren at the debate, which never happened. Never, ever happened. Bizarre moment there. But he's at least honest in the fact that he's not going to try. I mean, he said nothing will fundamentally change if I'm president to a group of donors, and he's made that clear to voters. Immigration activists have confronted him, asked him if he would halt deportations. He said, go vote for Trump. He just had that infamous showdown with that Iowa voter.
Right.
Calls him fat.
Right. Yeah. Where he may or may not have called him fat. He at least said he wasn't sedentary, basically. So the Biden wasn't sedentary. It was pretty clear what he was trying to say. And he's been saying, go vote for someone else in a variety of instances, specifically when leftist activists are coming to him and saying, will you commit to these policy ideas, these things that the left is transitioning to, the way the party is going? And he goes, no, absolutely not. So at least he's honest on that front, while Buttigieg is attempting to appear as all things to all people when he really says nothing at all. But the elitists on the coast who fetishize intellect without policy being attached to it love the fact that he just sounds smart and that he can just be a blank slate for everybody to latch onto.
That's so well said. So Joe Biden just gave this interview to NPR. The whole thing is pretty funny, but it's kind of amazing. But they asked specifically about an enthusiasm gap with young voters. The reporter says, why do you think there's an enthusiasm gap? And he says, there isn't an enthusiasm gap. What the hell are you talking about? Now, the reason I wanted to ask you about this is because you've actually gone to his events. I mean, that's part of what you do is you actually go to the candidate events. You talk to their supporters who are there. You ask them why they're there, why they're supporting them. What is the vibe at the Joe Biden events? Is there, in fact, an enthusiasm gap between his supporters and, say, Warren and Bernie's?
Yeah, so the event I went to in New Hampshire sticks out in my mind, where it's a very freewheeling process up there, where the primaries are open, so a lot of different people come and try to see what the candidates are all about. His event was people just kind of curious about him, saying by default, I like him. No one else has really stood out to me. There were people who just wanted to hear what he had to say. But as you were alluding to, Crystal, it was all older people, like 90% people over 60. It was much, not all, but I would say a very significant amount, way more than I saw at other candidates. The same day I went to a Beto O'Rourke town hall. Obviously, he's not in the race anymore, but there you saw it was young people and old people. It was a mix of people, and it was a jarring contrast to the Biden event that I had gone to the day before. I mean, the earlier in the day.
Emma, he says in that same interview, he says, come with me to a college campus. So I've accepted his challenge, and I hope to see you there, too. He said to say how much enthusiasm he has amongst the young people. I think we'll call him on that bluff. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Emma.
Thank you, guys.
Next on Rising, Michael Bloomberg. He finally sat down for his first TV interview since entering the 2020 race.
Let's just say a few moments raised our eyebrows. We're going to break down the interview with friend of the show, Tim Black. That is next.